Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, the number one source for news, analysis, and discussion on the Detroit Red Wings, the NHL, and all things hockey. Here are your hosts, Ryan Hanna, Brad Crisco, and Evan Lopsinger.
I will say this has been the greatest weekend of my life. And that is because I, for the first time this week, opened up Twitter to find out that Ryan had been suspended / temporarily banned. And that was my Stanley Cup. If the Red Wings don't make the playoffs, that was my Stanley Cup, because thank God I wasn't eating or drinking when I saw that, because I laughed so hard at that. And you got no sympathy from anyone. Everyone jumped right down your throat and was, saying this should have happened a long time ago. The Free Ryan Hanna hashtag was floating around for a bit.
You even tweeted that.
I tweeted
I was
out.
surprised that you tweeted that. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe Evan's on my side.
Oh, I knew you'd just go on the podcast account and harass everyone there. So I figured I'd play nice for once, but oh my God.
It's okay,
I saw that. I laughed so hard. I'm so sorry that happened. And I know how much that bothered you.
No.
That didn't bother you?
I was laughing, man. You know what?
Oh my God. I thought for sure you would be freaking out.
I looked at that and I was like, this is about to be the 12 most peaceful hours of my life.
Oh, so this is a bad thing.
Yeah. It
for
was.
Us.
Yeah, for you guys, because I was like, wow, I get to be a person. And you know what? I'd make the same joke again. I don't. I stand by it completely. I think it was a funny joke. So
should have just used the image that they can't.
Yeah, the shoot that guy image would have been a lot more tactful.
Yeah, it would have saved you.
But this way is almost funnier. What's the line? Comedy's legalized comedy?
I don't know.
The irony there. So the backstory to this is good friend of the show, Sean Shapiro, host of Expected by Whom, alongside Prashant Iyer, was talking in regards to expansion. He said if they go to 36 teams, they should do a relegation system. And he went into this big, long thing, and he qualified it by saying, he's like, I know this is not popular, but here's what I'm thinking, like 20 teams in the main league, 16 teams in the lower league. Here's how you go up and down. And I just responded with, the Board of Governors are going to pass a motion to shoot you.
Yes. That's where Twitter drew the line.
Yes. And you know what? I think fair enough. Mel laughed. She was like, you were right to make the joke and they were right to suspend you. I was like, yeah, you know what? Honestly, understandable. Have a great day. See you in 12 hours.
I'm glad you did some reflecting once you saw the news that you got suspended, and you'll be a better person for it.
It motivated me to do worse, actually.
Okay.
I kind of want to see how many 12-hour bans I can get before it actually starts to have some permanent effects.
You're a Twitter vigilante now.
Yeah, you know what? And I took a lot from you guys, because not being online and being able to cover hockey for 12 hours, that was a lot of Evan, because I'm surprised you even logged on to see that.
It was just very spur of the moment, Thought I'd have to deal with social media for a little bit, but for once it was good.
And then when I came back, I evoked the Brad Crisco side of me by posting the image that Brad loves to use of Goofy, like the messed up Goofy, saying, I'll effing do it again, which I will do. I gotta tell you, this rough and tumble life you guys live on the edge, it is exhilarating.
It is. It's crazy. We are wild men.
Well, I advocated you to leave your stress-free life, because he tweeted out the Free Ryan Hanna hashtag. I was the balanced opinion in the replies.
And I said, hold on.
Wait a minute.
You two were free of my nagging on one platform for 12 hours. You needed to enjoy that.
You were lucky I was away at a hockey tournament. Otherwise, I would have had way too much fun with that.
Brad, I wasn't lucky you were away at a hockey tournament. You were statistically probable to be away at a hockey tournament at any given moment.
Terrific point.
As you've noticed, this whole intro, we haven't talked about the Detroit Red Wings, and for good reason, because does that suck right now? But let's get into it. Folks, welcome to this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Back from online prison, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're going to be talking about Detroit's loss to Vegas. And the fact that this is, the fat lady hasn't sung, but she's warming up the vocal cords. What that means for the Red Wings, what the, not active tank, but the look towards the draft lottery looks like, how long the odds are for a miracle if you're still a believer in that, and more. Some minor news about the Red Wings prospects, etc. And then a conversation about who Detroit could potentially add for next season to help this thing along. We are also going to get into NHL news, the big topic lately, again, that spurred the online suspension, but expansion, as the NHL looks at markets like Houston, potentially Atlanta again, and then 2 more markets. And then we're going to get into our prospect profiles and more before overtime. Before all that, very quickly, Winged Wheel Podcast Night at the LCA, Saturday, March 29th. That's 6 days away. We found like 10 more tickets that were sitting around that we successfully petitioned the Red Wings to put into the Winged Wheel Podcast Night offer. So go to wingedwheelpodcast.com/Red Wings if you want to grab one of those final tickets. You get access to a pregame live recording of the Winged Wheel Podcast. You get a special Detroit Red Wings and Winged Wheel Podcast co-branded jersey. Your ticket's discounted, and it also includes a donation to the Jamie Daniels Foundation. There's giveaways, prizes, meet and greet, all that, lots more. So again, wingedwheelpodcast.com/Red Wings. Detroit went into Vegas. The odds were long. We already had a healthy course of people saying, why are you guys still even talking playoffs? But because, they weren't out of it yet, and they're still mathematically not, but because they weren't out of it yet, we thought, all right, you still need to come in and take points. You lost to Washington, but you really, over these next 3 games, need to win at least 2, if not more. And the Red Wings lost 6-3 to Vegas, but that almost seems like it was a closer score than what the game was. You were watching that game and you could look at 10 different aspects of it, and you're like, that this team is phoning it in isn't the right way to phrase it, but they seem defeated already. It was a tough loss to watch, but not an unfamiliar one.
You could look at the box score and just off of that, repeat that whole thing I had last episode about leadership, mental fragility, because you see the 1-0. Great. Awesome. Then you see the 1-1. Whatever. It's Vegas. You expect it. And then bang, bang, bang. 4 goals. Now, one of them got taken off the board on an awful rule, but like that, they melt down and the game feels over because of I forget the exact time frame, call it 12 seconds is what it felt like. Stretch. It's just like, oh, something bad happened. All right, well, pack it in, boys. We're done here.
And they gave up one right at the end of the first period. Like, that's just icing on the cake.
2
and
seconds.
they talk about it all the time. Like, you don't want to give up goals at the start, the first 2 minutes of the period, and the end. And that, for a team that's, hanging on by a thread, that can be a dagger early into a game.
Tomas Hertl had a hat trick before the game was halfway over, with like minutes to spare. And like Brad said, okay, they went up 2-1, and then they actually scored within like a 6.5 minute span. They made it 3-1. Offside review by the thinnest hair that's left on my head, and that is thin. Marchand called it back on the challenge. And to Detroit's benefit, you're like, okay, it's still just a 1-goal game. Didn't matter. A few minutes later, as Evan said, they scored at the end of the period to make it 3-1 anyways. Things aren't going Detroit's way on the ice, and it's not been as bad as when they were getting blown out. If you think a couple of years ago, those like 8, 9, 10 goal margins or tallies against them. But at the same time, I do also see a little bit of like, okay, the expected goals are not as lopsided, or Detroit's even favored, but you're watching the team and you're both right. Like, they crumble, and they do, in terms of the shift of the game and the vibes in the moment and exact times where they can't give one up. It almost seems at this point automatic against them. And I say this not because like, oh, they need to fix this and this is something that's going to turn around. It's just, to me, the hallmarks of a team where like it seems like they're coming to the end of their season.
That game certainly illustrated that these are two teams that are in different classes or different tiers of each other, because at 5-on-5 hockey during that game, Vegas didn't look uncomfortable when Red Wings were trying to pressure. It always seemed like Vegas knew that they would win the game, and that the Red Wings really weren't a true threat to take points from them.
So Detroit actually opened scoring. Lucas Raymond got a great deflection off of Pietrangelo on the power play from Larkin and Kane. Vegas then scored 3 times, and at the start of the second, Patrick Kane on the power play from Seider and Larkin. Again, the power play helps paper over a lot of the deficiencies, as Evan was alluding to there. Even though the game at that point to a lot of people felt lost. You're like, all right, it's still just a 1-goal game. Slipped away again, 4-2, 5-2. DeBrincat made a 5-3 in the third. Again, a 2-goal game is not something that's insurmountable, but it very much felt like Chris Paul with a massive 3-pointer to cut the lead to 45, like that whole meme. Jack Eichel scores in the empty net. It's 6-3 for Vegas. It's a lot of like the same stories we've been hearing. The PK has been suffering. The defense is leaky. You're seeing the end of the road for like careful configurations of the lineup that was barely working, and then one injury or one player having an off game kind of sets it all apart. Talbot obviously not good in net. Like, it's none of this was newly upsetting. And, you know, as Detroit stands now, it's just one loss of the 3 games that they had left on this road trip. They lost the first one to Washington. So again, the fat lady hasn't sung, but it feels like the turning point for even the last holders of hope for the Red Wings. To me, it would be a miracle that none of us would have predicted or would have been indicated at this point if this is going to turn around. The other teams are gaining on them. Even if they lose, they seem to be losing in overtime or shootout, which happens especially at this time of year with the amount of teams between them and the second wildcard spot. Like, let's be realistic here. Even the last little while talking about playoffs, it was hanging on to a thin glimmer of hope, and the way the team is playing hasn't really inspired anything to turn that around.
No, and I said going into this road trip, if they go anything less than like 2-1-1, mindset-wise, I'm off the playoff bus just because the odds would be insane, coupled with the strength of schedule, and now they cannot go 2-1-1 on it. They're already 0-2, and if they win out both, that's 500, and they're still way behind the 8 ball. And again, you look at the teams around them. Montreal is constantly picking up points. The Rangers are still the Rangers. Columbus is falling off a bit, but the Islanders are heating up. So again, the gap in points, purely on points, is not insane. It's the absolute volume of teams that have now comfortably passed the Red Wings. And again, you never say never. We watched the Tigers last summer. We remember the Hamburglar Senators. Like, it's sports. Crazy things happen. So you got to keep that in the back of your mind. But man, it is hard to not start rooting for Boston or Pittsburgh to, hey, how about you guys start picking up some points? Let's see how low this thing can go. I'm a big fan of Roger McQueen or Victor Eklund or Anton Frundell. Let's see if that's in range.
Yeah. Well, I switched over on the podcast account today from doing the playoff rooting guides to the now draft lottery rooting guide. It just felt like, you know, we'll still note if for those people who want to hang on to it, what needs to happen if they are to pull out the miracle. But at this point, a lot of people are looking downwards. So
statistically speaking, did we hit the point this weekend where their draft lottery odds are higher than their playoff odds?
I think they're both. I think the playoff odds are technically higher. By Money Puck, it was like 4 point something, and then first overall was 3% flat.
But if you factor in second overall, because hey, Schaefer or Misa, I'm good with either.
You'll take it, right? So you're getting to that flipping point in terms of which one's more likely. So to round it out, here's where we're at after that loss. The Red Wings, as of right now, are 4 spots out of the second wildcard spot. They have 70 points in 69 games. The Montreal Canadiens have 75 points in 69 games. Between Detroit and Montreal, you have the Blue Jackets at 71 points, the Islanders at 73 points, both with 69 games played, the same, and the Rangers with 74 points with 71 games played. So Detroit has 2 games in hand, but they wouldn't even pass them because they don't have the tiebreaker. So Detroit, on merit, like by the numbers, have to pass 1, 2, 3, 4 teams. And, you know, 5 points in 13 games, my God, that's not insurmountable at all. But again, the way they're playing, the injuries, who they have to play coming up, and the fact that it's not just one team that has to do bad, it's 4. That's what's making it so unlikely mathematically. That's what's making it so unlikely as you look at it. And that's why there's a lot of angry people every time I post the playoff rooting guide.
They do have one more game against Montreal, which at this point would be huge if your team playoffs. but they got the murderers row of the NHL and the Stanley Cup contenders, so they got to take points off of all of them as well. It's a massively uphill climb. It's beyond a blue square at this point. Might be a black diamond, where I don't think we're at double black diamond yet, but man, is it getting close.
Is that the most Evan analogy you've ever heard in your entire life?
Have you guys been skiing before?
Yeah, yes.
No, I snowboard, but
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
fair enough.
same thing. I thought at first you were going to go for some kind of Jackson Hole reference, but we're close enough.
I saved those for the Patreon exclusive.
Now, if you are team, well, I've embraced the suck and let's see how far down you can get in 13 games. This is a little bit different. So in reverse order by points percentage, here are the standings. Starting with 32. San Jose, Chicago, Nashville, Buffalo, Philly, Seattle, Pittsburgh, Boston, Anaheim, then Detroit. So Detroit is, yes, 1 in draft lottery range. And 2, a lot of these teams I think it's reasonable for Detroit to be looking at their performance. Detroit was 70 points. I think you can look as far down as like 75 points with Philly. And I think all those teams are destined to intermingle with each other at least a little bit. So you could be as high as like 5th, maybe, in terms of the draft lottery order. Any higher than that, and things are looking a little bit wild. But Detroit's in range here for 1, very slim odds of moving up, and 2, still a halfway decent pick in this. Now, what does this mean on the ice? You're not really, the players aren't playing to lose. Imagine you work at a company with a finite number of positions for employees. Are you going to want to go work the job fair? No. Players are not rooting for their replacement, right? So put it out of your mind that, Larkin is going to want to sit out to get them a better draft pick, or Compher is going to want to sit out to whatever you might look at there. But the team, if someone's injured, you shut them down. You give games to rookies in terms of ice time or whatever you want to do. You want to call up a player. Here's now where you start to maybe not play the top line so much, give other guys power play time to give them the exposure to it. And that's about as much as you can expect.
If Justin Hall was the power play quarterback we were looking for, and we've missed it this whole time, I'm going to be really pissed off.
PK Subban's going to have a lot of words to eat if that's the case. But at this point, I think we're looking downwards rather than upwards.
I'm mentally there, unfortunately.
The vibes on the ice and off the ice are in sync right now, and that almost never happens with a fringe playoff team. So that's how you know it's either a rocket ship to the top or a stone to the bottom of the ocean. And I think it's that right now.
And Ryan, you said these players aren't going to go help out at the job fair. They're not going to tank to get the replacement in here. Half the team sure as hell looks like they are.
There's you watch this team, and I get it. It's end of season hockey when they know they're out of it. But there are, at any given point, 5 guys where you're like, any game where you're like, this guy could not be on the team next year and the team would be better for it. And sometimes, like, yeah, you always get the Tarasenkos, the Halls, but this year you're also getting like the Compher in there a lot of games where he's having a massively down year. Again, you're over deploying Ben Sherratt, where you would love to have Ben Sherratt on as your like number 4, 5, or 6 guy ideally, but he's on your top pair, and then the entire top 4 struggles. Berggren, I thought, has looked terrible a lot lately. Like, you look at this and you're like, we're talking addition by subtraction again.
Well, look at the vibes with the Red Wings, and then look at the vibes with the second wildcard team, Montreal. Like, they just had a come from behind win the other night. Like, these are teams going in the opposite directions of one another right now. So, I'm very much I'm here to be entertained. I'll let the chips fall where they fall with the playoffs or the draft lottery, but sometimes it's just the writing is starting to be on the wall, and they just don't look like a playoff team on talent and sort of execution.
Mentality's not there, you're right.
Yeah.
They're not dogs.
The big picture too look right now isn't great either, because the Red Wings were ahead of Montreal coming out of the Four Nations, and now they're 5 points behind them. And Montreal's not doing it on the backs of veterans that Hughes brought in to fill out the roster. Yeah, they have some guys, some of the older vets who are playing well, but it's Suzuki, it's Caulfield, it's Lane Hudson. Like, Their young guys are stepping up to the plate in a big situation. I'm not saying that's not happening in Detroit, but if you're looking at the state of the rebuild between the Senators, the Canadiens, the Red Wings, and the Sabres, it's hard to not say Ottawa and Montreal are in a much better spot right now because they are getting proven results out of the team. And again, you can circle back. If we only look at players we expect to be around 6 years from now, that's a different conversation because Raymond, Larkin, DeBrincat, Edvinsson, Seider, Kasper, they're not disappointing. Even amongst this free fall, you can't put the blame on those guys. But then the bigger question, which we'll have after the season of, well, do we have any faith that they're going to build properly around those guys? Because it looks like Ottawa and Montreal have, at least to a larger degree, not a full, the fully set plan, done a better job of it.
There's the point here that was made by Emily Kaplan before the show, which I thought was really interesting. And it didn't surprise me based on what I've heard from the Red Wings in general, but she said, and I have an approximate quote here, I remember last year when Patrick Kane signed in Detroit after being courted by several teams, including Vegas, and then Coach Derek Lalonde told me, this is Emily Kaplan speaking, what a boost that was for the locker room. The guys were like, he believes in us. This year at the trade deadline, management didn't do much, and I was told that the feeling in the locker room was kind of the opposite. A lot of players disappointed that they didn't get more reinforcements, but even considering that and the way things have gone the last couple of games, Coach Todd McLellan told us he still sees a group that believes they could and should be in the playoffs this year. And nothing in there is earth-shattering. But to me, I hear that, and you hear these notions that the locker room wants to go now. You can never blame a player for wanting to win every year or thinking that their team can win. If you're within 3 points, 5 points of a playoff spot, you're not listening to the media or the fans or talking heads on a podcast. You're like, yeah, that's a couple games and we're back in it. What do you mean? Because the Red Wings could rip off 3 in a row here, and then we're all of a sudden having to talk about playoffs again. But to me, I see that and I'm like, that just doesn't match up with what you see on the ice. That doesn't match up with the effort you saw at home against Columbus before the outdoor game, and then the result from the outdoor game as well. And yeah, you can point to games in there where it's like the goalie lost us that game, or X happened and we lost a point out of it. But still, Evan's point stands here. This doesn't seem to me on talent, but especially execution of late in crunch time, a team that deserved the reinforcements.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in the statement you read out there. Like, I could imagine being in a locker room where you're finally starting to feel like you're going in the right direction, especially some of the longer term guys, Dylan Larkin, obviously. And you're like, okay, like we're ramping up here. We're in a wild card spot. We can hang with some of the big boys in this league. Trade deadline comes around, and you see all these other teams just loading up. You're like, okay, like, are we going to get someone here? Are we going to bring in a veteran guy to really manage our emotions, and then nothing happens? Like, I can understand why players might be or are upset about not getting reinforcements, whether that actually happened in this instance or not. I can totally sympathize with that.
I'm going to go the opposite route here. I think it's not the mentality, but the reaction's absolute garbage. Everything with this team points to them being just, again, mental fragility. So he didn't load up, so you're just going to, we're not going to bother then. The New York Islanders, surging, flew past the Red Wings, traded Brock Nelson at the deadline. They sold. Montreal, what did they load up with at the deadline? Anything? No?
So the Red Wings should have sold.
Those locker rooms lost.
Both sides say yes.
Those locker rooms had key players leave, and it looks like their mentality is, we'll show him we're actually a good team. Like, we're going to prove everybody wrong. Yzerman did, and I will point out, the objective correct thing. He basically stood pat. This team wasn't good enough to compete. You don't sell off futures for it. I'm fully on board with that. I understand, yeah, the locker room would have liked them to load up. But you take the season as a whole, what did they do to deserve it? And then Yzerman just stands pat and goes, we're not selling any of you guys. You can all stick around for the run. Now go make me the playoffs. And they're like, no. They melt down. They free fall like they do every year. Again, it's hard to quantify because we're not in the locker room. We're not in any of these guys' heads. But this is the third year in a row they've free fallen in March in a playoff race. There is something seriously wrong that this keeps happening. And then you add the context that you just gave that only furthers the problem. Like the point of there is a problem here.
It boils down to, I think last episode we had that discussion of how much of it's talent and how much of it's mentality and execution. And is it the boring blend of both? But to me, it just kind of reinforces that it's the boring blend of both.
Yes.
Because a winning team is going to foster a more positive attitude, and a more positive attitude is going to foster better execution on the ice and a better mentality, blah, blah, blah. I also think the Red Wings are lacking a big element of guys who have been there, done that, and we'll have a conversation later about who could potentially help with that. But where I disagree with you, Brad, is I don't think that they said, okay, well, then we're not going to try. I think they're trying.
No,
I think
yeah,
the team
obviously
just sucks.
No, they suck, but like, trust me, I'm with you. The biggest problem by far with this team is exactly that. They're bad. This is not a good team, and it's just, I hate talking about intangibles when you're trying to analyze a hockey team. And well, you know me, I've actively avoided trying to do that for a long time. But eventually it's a pattern. And when things keep stacking up, pointing to this exact thing, it's hard to ignore. And especially when you factor in that Yzerman loves loading up with veterans. Yeah, there's a lot of young guys playing too, but Larkin, Sherratt, Comfer, I know Kop's not here anymore, Hall, like Gustafsson, I could keep going. There's guys who have been in this league for a long time.
You're naming all the wrong ones. That's the problem.
No, well, you can go Kane, you can go DeBrincat. I don't know, like, who's to blame? Might be all of them. It might be only a couple bad apples. I don't know. That's why I hate talking about this crap. But the evidence is piling up that something fundamentally is wrong with the mentality of this team. The biggest problem, I will repeat because Ryan is right, is they suck. So it's hard to foster a positive attitude when you're struggling to stay afloat all the time. But man, like, and you're right, they didn't give up because they didn't add anybody. But again, I look at Montreal, New York, and New York specifically. The Rangers aren't setting the world on fire, but they're keeping pace. The Islanders are on a heater. The Canadians are on one hell of a heater. They came out there like, they have this, we are going to prove the world wrong mentality. You can see it in their game. The urgency, the desperation, I'm going to run through a wall to win this game. And you don't see that in Detroit. At least not with the Red Wings. You see it with other Detroit teams. But, oh my God, it's just so frustrating because, again, I can't sit here and pinpoint to one thing because it's an intangible. And how can you?
You know what hypothetical I'm going to give you now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now that we had this whole conversation, they're going to rip off 5 straight.
Yeah, I know, 100%. I know how the reverse jinxes work.
Yeah.
I'm here for it.
Well, I think this is going to be the topic of conversation, definitely as we wrap up the season, barring the miracle. But one way or another, whether you're someone hanging on to a sliver of hope of this turning around again in another, 7-game heater, or the sliver of hope that lottery luck will ever come Detroit's way.
If the Red Wings were a steak, are they well done for you right now? Like, they need to, like, they're overcooked, it's done, that thing's going in the garbage, or are they like a rare, like
They're where you ask for medium rare and your first 3 slices off the end, you're not seeing much pink and you're like, maybe it's just the edges.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer.
But you're getting concerningly deep into that steak.
Vegetarians are super confused by this analogy.
Okay, other Red Wings news. Someone who we thought we wouldn't see again this year, Jeff Petry might be returning. And by all rights, like I couldn't get this confirmed anywhere, but I just got the sense that it wasn't looking likely that he'd come back. Now, if this is it for Jeff Petry's career, I wouldn't be surprised to see him want to go out on his own terms and on the ice rather than on IR. But Jeff Petry looks to be poised to return. On the flip side, Erik Gustafsson seems to be out for maybe the entire year as he kind of took an awkward tumble into the boards. That's long term. I don't know that we're going to see him again as we head to the end of the season. Other Red Wings news as we get into the prospect system. Shout out to Trey Augustine and Red Savage, Big Ten tourney champs, as Michigan State double overtime win over OSU. So Augustine and Red Savage get to raise that trophy once again as Michigan State takes that They're going to be watching the Frozen Frenzy as well. And then Axel Sandin Pellikka today, just for some good vibes, because that was a terribly low vibes conversation to start the show. Axel Sandin Pellikka, 3 primary assists in the first period alone today. I haven't even checked to see what happened after that yet, because we were recording. But help is coming, in theory. All right. There's a lot to talk about with the Red Wings yet, but why don't we take a quick break here to hear from the sponsors of the Winged Wheel podcast. More after this. Eating healthy when you're busy is tough. Usually it's either bland meal prep or greasy fast food, the kind of thing that's turning Evan into a milk bag. But with Tempo, we don't have to choose. Their chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals give us quick, delicious options without sacrificing nutrition. Our latest delivery from Tempo featured the filet mignon with creamy mushroom sauce and the spicy chipotle beef and sweet potato bowl. Both were incredible. The filet was tender and rich, while the chipotle beef had just the right kick. Best of all, they're ready in just 3 minutes, way faster than waiting for takeout. Tempo makes it easy to eat well and feel good, offering over 20 weekly options that fit different dietary needs, including protein-packed, calorie-conscious, and fiber-rich meals. And right now, you can try it at an incredible Winged Wheel podcast discount. For a limited time, Tempo is offering our listeners 60% off your first box. Go to tempomeals.com/wingedwheel. That's tempomeals.com/wingedwheel for 60% off your first box. tempomeals.com/wingedwheel. Rules and restrictions may apply. Welcome back. Before we get into non-Red Wings news, I want to borrow something. Max Bultman wrote an article, and I'll link it. And by the way, Max is going to be back on the show. We haven't done our March version of Good in the Room yet, but he will be on. So someone mentioned, like, is that done? No, Max could not be free of us that quickly. He is, unfortunately, I think we have his contract for life. So his soul belongs to not us, but Evan specifically.
It's like the Guinness Brewery land lease.
Do we just find another word Evan can't pronounce?
100-year lease, 1,000-year lease on Max.
On what land lease?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
The owner of that land lease, Werenski. And
do you want
Bruce
more
Boudreau.
mouth noises this episode? 'Cause I will give you more mouth noises.
Without knowing it, I feel like he wouldn't be able to say rural either.
Rural.
Oh, attaboy.
Max brought up, who can the Red Wings add? Because as you mentioned, Brad, other teams, without talking about long-term core, other teams have turned things around in the short term that have made the difference in the margins in terms of that, wild card pack who can step up. And some of them are more substantial. You think about what Ottawa gave up for Ullmark, and adding Ullmark is substantial. But some of it is smaller moves, and some of it's not making some of the moves that, Detroit would have made, for example. We talked about Detroit's mentality, Detroit's, nastiness to play against, Detroit's talent up front, and a name that Max raised in his article as a potential option, a couple names actually, Brad Marchand, Brock Boeser. We've talked about Boeser previously on the pod. Pre-show, Brad, you actually also brought up John Tavares, and these are not traditional, right? You're not going to be one to hand out a lot of years to these guys, but relative to what the Red Wings have, and in terms of being a stopgap until the future gets here, because this isn't the NFL, this isn't the NBA, draft picks don't make a massive difference day one, by and large. Is that an option? Marchand, for example, he was asking for 3 times 7.5 from Boston? Well, that didn't make sense for Boston. But if you're Detroit, does that make sense for you?
Makes a lot of sense for Detroit. With Marchand and Tavares, they have one advantage that a lot of guys don't when talking about aging stars. They never really could skate. So you're not worried about them losing their legs. That's never been a strength of either of their games. Marchand's a better skater than Tavares, but you're not worried about them losing that. They never really had it. And their hockey IQ is very high. Their natural talent, their passing ability, their ability to make plays in traffic. A lot of the things that the Red Wings don't have out of their top power play unit, you could get there. And yeah, Tavares, you've got the memes of the Leafs never getting out of the first round, but he's been around the league for so long at a high level. He's been into the second round a couple times with the Leafs and the Islanders, so he's got that. Marchand's won a cup. He's been to cup finals. He's played in a billion playoff rounds, and he's got that, fiery passion about him, more so than Tavares, that the Red Wings just look like they're lacking outside of a handful of players at times. And yeah, 7.5 for a guy that age, not ideal. But at this point, I'm willing to overpay for genuinely good players rather than more of these the Confer and Cop contracts. These middle six never were elite. And yeah, I'd rather roll the dice on, like, it worked with us with Patrick Kane. Yeah, at 5-on-5, he's got all the hustle of a paper bag flowing in the breeze, but he's still an absolute weapon on the power play. There is value in Patrick Kane.
Just like the hustle of Evan looking at a beautiful dinner that he just cooked and having to be at the podcast recording in 15 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very recent event for me, actually.
Here's the counter to that, though. People are looking at Steven Stamkos and not been all terrible. You guys got 44 points in 69 games for the Predators this year, but he's not been an all-star for them. So are you doing this knowing that there is going to be a fall off, but it is better that you're just trying to do Kane, but hopefully a little bit better than even you did with Kane? Is that the MO here?
Essentially, yeah. You understand neither of those guys are coming in and changing your organization. And yeah, the Kane being a strictly one-way player is less than ideal. You don't have that with Tavares and Marchand specifically. You can trust them all 200 feet of the ice, even with their age catching up to them. And I can't even say that. They're both having great years. Like, the fall off hasn't happened yet, and the Bruins weren't good this year. And Tavares is a bit more of that. Okay, sure, he's doing it in Toronto. Is that going to happen in Detroit? Yeah, that's a real concern. But, I mean, it's Yzerman's flaw. He's got to swing for skill more and smartly. Like, the Tarasenko drop-off was happening before the Red Wings made that deal. Marchand, his drop-off might happen the first year in Detroit. It might not.
I think he already has kind of lost his step. Like, we're not talking prime Marchand, especially after coming back from surgery.
No, but we're talking about a 100-point player. Oh, no, now he's only putting up 60 to 65 points. What are we ever going to do? And with the inflation on the salary cap, that's probably the going rate for a 60 to 65-point player. And if he only ends up at 40 to 50 points at the third year, that's still productive. You can, what's that worth in that salary cap? Maybe $4.5 million. So you're kind of getting screwed on $3 million. Sure. But again, it's better than what they've been doing. And I'm going on the extreme example of that. But, like, something has to give. And also, here's the thing. And this is the thing I don't think we've ever talked about. Winning makes it easier to sign good players. We always keep talking about how are the Red Wings going to get all these superstars in here. Win. That's what makes you a destination. And if they keep missing the playoffs, like, you got to do something. I'm not saying sell the whole future just to make the playoffs and get swept in the first round next year. But if you get in the playoffs for a couple years, maybe you get to the second round once, maybe you take a very tough team to 6 or 7 games, players around the league will notice and they'll go, oh, maybe that is an option now because Detroit's not a destination yet.
Well, according to the players, they've already got the arena to do some attraction. So part of that formula is the winning. And, you got to bring in some of these guys who you got to pay for their resume. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to do it because, no offense to some of the guys they brought in, but nobody's walking in at training camp and being like, holy crap, there's JT Compher. And that's not a slight on JT Compher.
It's not the Patrick Kane effect, though.
No.
When Patrick Kane is in that room, you're like, holy shit, that's one of the best American, if not the best American player of all time. And I get to play with him. That's incredible. That inspires everyone from the bottom up. The Red Wings need to do something like that. People might not be hot to trot on John Tavares, wondering when the cliff is coming. And, he's never been a world beater in terms of his speed, but he's won everything but the Stanley Cup at the NHL level. He would be exactly the type of guy you'd want to bring in to really kind of promote that self-belief that this team can do things. And when bad situations happen and shit hits the fan, he can be the guy who can help weather this team through those 7-game losing streaks, the times when things aren't going right. Like, you're going to have to, experiment and try those things. If it doesn't work, who cares? We're doing it when the Red Wings aren't a contender anyway. You may as well try and see if something like that works.
I think there's other things like the other aspects of their games, as you mentioned, Evan, that is the big value there because you can get 40 to 50 points even from the guys that we talked about on the Red Wings where the contracts aren't favorable. Like Compher and Kopp have both given us that, and they've both given the Red Wings subpar seasons as well. But yeah, if you have Brad Marchand in your top 6 and he's having a down year production-wise, but he's teaching your team how to give a damn and have some piss and vinegar to your game and, you know, how you go in and how you defend your players, whoever it is, whether it be your goalie or your star young player, and that Tampa Bay mentality where if something happens to a Tampa Bay Lightning player, that person gets mugged by every Lightning on the ice.
You're not fighting one person when it's Florida and Tampa. You're fighting 5 guys.
All of them. And you teach them how to have that mentality. What you lost with Perron, for example, and that's just one aspect of it. John Tavares brings, in theory, a little bit more too, because that's still a very talented player where that's either your second line center, or if the step is too slow, then he's a great top 6 forward to have regardless, because then you're still adding top 6 talent to this team that desperately needs it. So not every player out there who has a lot of points last year is the answer. We know that can lead you astray a lot in this league, and it's burned the Red Wings before, but you know, you can make long-term moves. Let's say they sign a Marner, or let's say you rewind and they traded for a big name at some point in the past. That's all still like you would love for the Red Wings to do that. But when you're talking the in the margins moves, this is the kind of thing where this is how you keep the long-term plan, as Brad said, without mortgaging a ton of futures. And all you're really mortgaging is chunks of your cap space.
It's worked with Patrick Kane. Like, we have the pilot project to see that this works. You know, not everyone is Patrick Kane. You're not going to get him for a cheap contract who's, you know, coming off an unknown surgery in the NHL. Maybe you try it again, and you bring in someone with the pedigree, and you got to pay a little bit more to get them to Detroit, and you got to pay them for their previous successes, but it worked with Patrick Kane. And he's helped guys like Lucas Raymond go to the next level. Maybe a John Tavares is the guy who helps Marco Kasper go to the next level. He would get to see how someone who's played in the NHL since they were 18, how to do that.
It also depends, are you putting them in a position to succeed? The same theory is applied to rookies as it is applied to aging veterans. Assuming Patrick Kane doesn't come back next year, where are the Red Wings' holes at forward? Ignoring the entire bottom 6, because that's another conversation. First line left wing, second line right wing. Okay, the right wing, that could be internal, possibly. Maybe Danielson's ready to step in. Maybe you get another, not a guy of that caliber, but just, you know, a body to fill there. But I'm looking at 2 left shots. You're telling me John Tavares and Brad Marchand with their hockey IQ couldn't keep up with Larkin and Raymond? They're not keeping up with them skating-wise, but when you have Dylan Larkin at center, you don't need to. You have that center who can do it all and do the hard work and then support the wingers in that way. It's exactly why Marco Kasper's working with Patrick Kane and Alex DeBrincat, because he's that do-it-all center. He's not as skilled as them, but he doesn't need to be. He can facilitate. And that's what Larkin does on the first line. So I think there's a lot of sense that could be made to grabbing one of those 2 guys, plugging them in on that line. Now Soderblom is like slotted appropriately, and it's a trickle-down effect, right? And it's not the only issue.
Defense.
But
help.
This is a team that can't score at 5-on-5. So they have to address it. And again, the obvious answer here, everybody's yelling it in. Yeah, you would prefer a Mitch Marner or someone of that caliber. That's plan A. But if plan A is not an option, what's plan B? Because they can't run it back this year. I don't want them to go out and sell futures for players of that caliber. I want them to sell futures for superstars, which don't come available. So this is the best plan B that is out there right now. And again, even that, not very likely, which is the part we haven't mentioned. You're a Tavares or a Marchand, you're probably ring chasing if you go to free agency. So
Florida's, Vegas's, Carolina's.
Exactly. So that even is an uphill battle, but you got to try.
Marchand and Florida just are like peanut butter and jam. The only other team I could see him going to is to play with his island mate and Nathan McKinnon.
Oh, that romance between those 2, and you had Crosby in there. It's just like, get a room.
Yeah.
The Red Wings would have to, like, everyone's saying, okay, well, what are they going to do about all the players they have? No matter what, no matter if you agree or disagree, the Red Wings have to have addition by subtraction for the mistakes or guys who are just, they don't fit on this team this offseason. Like Tarasenko, Hall, you look at other guys with longer term contracts. If you can offload them somehow, you need to shed some of that. You need to, take the loss. Don't go with sunk cost fallacy. I don't know what you're going to be able to recover from Tarasenko anymore, but I just don't see it. Like that's well and gone to me. Like you think buyouts, you think just burying them in their cap hits in the minors, whatever you need to do. The Red Wings need to clear the way for the roster to turn over, whether you're bringing guys up, bringing guys in externally, trading for guys, whatever it is. But the debt, there's just too much dead weight that needs to be shed.
And the one thing we haven't talked about in this conversation is, another experiment that they've tried is playing rookies, and that has also worked. So that could also be an option as well, now that you've quote unquote graduated some of these other guys.
Yeah. And you do that, and the way you shelter that and give that longevity too is by adding in the support for them, where I think it's so good that Johansson really embraced his second pair, role, and that worked out really well for a long time there. But you can't, if that's what you need to rely on, you are in a world of danger as a team. That is such a big risk. If you need those guys to do well, you need to surround them with some support. Is it the best player in the world? Probably not. But is it someone who can step in and take some of the hard minutes off them and give them a space to step back from time to time? That's the kind of thing you need to supplement it with.
For me, the D is a lot more solvable. The contracts obviously require some adjustment, but I feel like that back end with the younger guys there in Seider, Johansson, and Edvinsson, they just need some workhorses who are, not going to make a lot of mistakes. Just be minute munchers, hard to play against guys, and the Red Wings have really missed on those.
All right. Well, there's going to be a lot of conversation about this upcoming. So why don't we leave that one there? You let us know what you think about our terrible ideas, and let's jump into some NHL news. Big flurry of information all got out at the same time, which is how meetings happened and certain people were tipped off because they wanted the noise around it, and the NHL probably testing the waters. And it's not just where there's smoke, there's fire. We can see the fire here. 34 teams is probably in the immediate future for the NHL in terms of plans, and Houston seems to be the big name. There's a billionaire and then a surrounding investment group that wants to bring a team to Houston. That's been one of the biggest markets labeled for NHL expansion for a long time. Untapped in terms of having a team there where there are a lot of other sports teams. Hockey in Texas is thriving. I think a deep Dallas Stars run would do a world of help for this cause as well, because people from Houston are going to want their own team to root for rather than the Dallas team. And those aren't current NHL fans for the most part. Like, if you can create new fans, that's what the NHL looks for. You can move a team to Quebec City and sell out every night, but those are people giving their money to hockey in the NHL one way or the other. You can create new fans in America. That's what the NHL is going to look to. The other side's Atlanta, yet again. And for the same reason, you might be thinking, how are they going to run that back again? Metro market, massive amount of hockey fans. You want their dollars coming into the league. And the biggest part of this, which is why we're not even talking about 34 and potentially 36, the league is going to be targeting like a $2 billion expansion fee here. And they might not get it. They might get 1.8. They might get 1.75. Who knows? But they're going to want that cash because A, the owners loved getting that cash before, and B, if there's a trade war or the Canadian versus US dollar suffers more, like these teams are going to need something to, hold them over, whether you believe that or not. And the league is going to try to bring in that revenue.
Yeah, I was listening to something, I think it was on 32 Thoughts today. They were talking about how they want to do two in the immediate future, but they'll probably stagger them. They're starting to get to the point in the conversation where they're worried about talent dilution.
We're there.
Have you seen some of the bottom sixes in this NHL?
But here's the thing, and no hockey fan's going to want to hear this. Bad hockey equals good hockey. Right?
Spoken like a forward, but go on.
Yeah.
So Four Nations was terrible then.
No, it was great. It either has to be unbelievably elite or there has to be enough mistakes to make the hockey entertaining. Like anybody who's ever went to a junior hockey game, that's some of the best hockey you'll ever watch. And half those rosters are never going to get past U Sports, but mistakes lead to chances, lead to chaos. There is a line there where it's like, okay, well, if every team can't get enough of the upper end talent to make it worthwhile, that is also a problem. So it is a fine line to walk. I don't personally think we're all that close to it. I mean, we've went and watched enough Griffin games to know that's entertaining hockey. Like, there's 4 or 5 guys on any AHL team that could come up to the NHL and not look out of place. It's a superstar dilution that you got to be careful of. But when you look at Tampa and Florida and Colorado, there's enough to go around. They have too many. So
yeah,
I think 2 more is fine. I could probably push to 4. And then that's where I'm getting to my, all right, now we're stretching it. But your point about, and Canadian fans don't want to hear this, Quebec City's going to give money to the NHL no matter what. You need untapped markets. And yes.
Yeah, they're in the friend zone. They screwed up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Houston will be a revenue generator. Atlanta, if done properly, could be all right. That's the one key thing you got to remember with Atlanta. And I'm not a big advocate to go back to Atlanta. I think it's ridiculous to give them a 3rd try. But both iterations of the Atlanta franchise, the Flames and the Thrashers, were terrible. Always terrible. That city has never seen a good team. So you look at what happened in Vegas. They were great. The city latched on. They're a success story. I can't imagine that team not being successful now. When they moved to Dallas, good team, success. Florida, terrible forever. Now that they're good, success. Like, you just need to put a winning product out there. And the size of those metropolises, it makes sense to me. Again, Houston, number 1 on everybody's list. Anybody who says Houston shouldn't be the first expansion target doesn't know business. There's a couple markets I could be talked into over Atlanta for sure, but I see what the NHL's doing here, and it makes perfect sense to me.
They need the correct ownership groups to come in. You can find $30 million mega cities to put a team in, but if you don't have the right ownership group coming in for the right reasons, you could put out a 4 Nations level team. It's not going to change the fact that that team will not maximize their revenue. So it starts with good ownership. My opinions on expansion remain the same. I think it's a lazy way of doing it. I think this league needs to optimize a lot more of its internal operations first, and I'll point to how people consume the game. They need to figure out how to figure out streaming, the network issues. They got to figure that out first, because I think there's a lot of revenue left on the table with current markets before we even get into talking about expansion and talent dilution, all those other things.
I fully agree. And I think there's no reason to ever hear in the salary cap era internal cap, or owner is hurting for money, or this team is hurting for season ticket sales. Like, to me, sports franchises are money printers. Even in a recession or upcoming recession or whatever, billionaire and billionaire conglomerates and funds and groups, they buy these up because they are money printers. Like the group, Fenway Sports Group, that's no longer a unique entity. There's a bunch of them out there that own multiple franchises across multiple leagues. So I want groups in here who have a commitment or even a mandate where you're not just spending to the cap, or at the very least spending to the degree that makes sense for your roster construction. But like Evan said, every team should do what Florida does in terms of the amenities and the system and the culture and what they have in their teams and their offerings. Like, I want to see that advantage erased, because I want that to be offered, because I don't want, this owner's pockets are thinner because of his other venture, and now the NHL team suffers. I think that's so stupid.
Well, you put a lot of pressure on new ownership groups to pony up $2 billion, and then they get a seat at the table and they see, and I'm making this up, they see Winnipeg. And Winnipeg's one of, if not the best team in the NHL right now. They see that they're bringing in 16,000 fans, not an optimized operation, maybe on a little bit of life support from the league. And they say, I'm not all that interested in that. And they put pressure on that ownership group to figure their things out. Like, it'll be a very interesting dilemma if we get to those sorts of expansion fees, because I think there's going to be a lot of requests from those groups on ice and around operations at the NHL level.
I'm an old head. I think 30 was perfect because that's what I grew up with for the most part, obviously. I think 32 was pushing it. I think 34 is a lot. I think 36 seems insane to me. I'm also getting into the point where if you go to 34 and 36, I think you're talking about wild card, playoff setups there. Maybe not full on expanded playoffs like an extra round, but like a wild card mini round before the traditional playoffs that we know, because it's too many teams and there's just one cup.
Yeah, I'm firmly in the camp of if you go to 34 teams, you absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, have to go to, at the very minimum, a 7 to 10 play-in series like the NBA does, there'd be too many teams that would just never see the playoffs. And I know that's a touchy subject for us at the moment, but if it happens in a 32-team league, it would absolutely happen in a 34-team league.
I said before, and I maintain, I think by the time we hit 2030, we'll have at least plans for 36 teams. I'd be surprised if we were much further off that. When you're talking $2 billion fees for a new team, owners are not going to say no to that.
It's easy money for them, and I'm sure their portfolios are extensive and well insulated. Oh, if someone's going to cut you a check for $2 billion divided by 32, you're probably going to take it.
And I know it's a ways off, but if we're talking into the 2030s, obviously me having 2 kids in minor hockey, I can tell you, minor hockey, the talent's insane now. The NHL is going to be a different product in 10 years in terms of, look at a game now compared to the early 90s. Fourth liners couldn't skate back then. I know it's a big touchy subject, but I'm not worried about the talent dilution at all. At least not yet.
All right. That is expansion. This next segment, it was requested that we move this to the end of the main segments because not everyone is into prospects. So the prospect profile just before overtime here. Today's prospect profile is a name that probably for a lot of people tops the list of potential wingers that are available in the 2025 NHL entry draft. None other than Porter Martone, who is a special talent in my mind, one of the top players in the OHL. Really, really intriguing player. Doesn't play center, so, doesn't have the positional advantage or intrigue of some of his peers around him, but still always in the conversation as, even a number 1 pick. So who's Porter Martone? What does he do on the ice? And is he worth that top pick consideration?
I don't have him in the same group as the top guys. He's not far off. The thing that scares me with Porter Martone, and Ryan, I know I've said this to you many times. I think I've said it on the show. Beware the late birthday CHL player, because the stats will always look impressive, but it's their 3rd go around in that league, and you cannot compare Porter Martone's stats to Michael Misa's because it's another year older, right? And I know the late birthday thing's a disadvantage, but it always throws a red flag in my mind. That being said, Martone's numbers are excellent. Good to the point where if he was drafted last year and then he put up these years in his draft plus 1, you're thrilled if you're the team that drafted him. He's big, excellent shot, super creative. The foot speed's good for the size. He's not going to be, blowing anybody away in the NHL with his skating, but it's not bad for a guy that size, which when you're that big is a plus. I don't know. I think he's intriguing. He's a pure goal scorer. He's got a lot of creativity. He's that guy who scored a lot of highlight reel goals in his career because he just finds lanes and he just finds weird ways to dice through traffic and make things happen. I don't think he's got enough of a dynamic element in his skill level to translate to this guy's going to be an NHL superstar. But if you throw him on the right wing on a first line with a good center, he could be absolutely electric. Imagine Anthony Mantha with less consistency issues. Martone has those a little bit, but not to the same extent. I just see that, he's big enough to be a power forward, but he doesn't really play like a power forward. He's more of a skill guy. I don't know. He's intriguing because I could see him going a lot of ways role wise in the NHL, but either way, he's gonna put up some points.
I think for me, immediately what jumps off the page is his his build, right? Like he's 6'3", 6'4", whatever it may be. And he's already well over 200 pounds. Like this is a big kid. And, the questions will always come up. Is he just bullying the younger kids at the OHL level? But he doesn't really he uses his size to his advantage, but he's not using it to bully kids in the OHL. Like the elite talent overwhelms them, not his size. So it is pretty impressive what he's done this year. Like he's incredible with the puck below the dots. He's maybe one of the best players in the draft. He's got an incredible release, very deceptive shot. And, he's a big kid. Like he's going to play that, more traditional power forward type role in the NHL. If he never ends up being a productive player, like he could play down in the lineup too. So, you don't want to hear that if you're picking in the top 5. But I think his skill really is undeniable. I don't think he's a 1 or 2 guy in this draft, but if you get him 3, 4, 5, I think you're absolutely thrilled because I think he'll be that kind of playoff dog that you're looking for.
Yeah, I think the thing that sets him into the category of a little bit more hesitation than some of the other guys we have talked about or will talk about, like you guys said, I think the floor is lower with him because you could be thinking down the lineup just with the archetype of, his size compared to his peers. It's burned the Red Wings before. So, but that you can't paint every prospect with that brush like you saw with that. What Evan just said, like you have to kind of look at their game. To me, I see what Porter Martone can do with the puck on his stick. Like sometimes when the play is firmly in the offensive zone and you can see he's the quarterback, he's calling the shots, he's moving around with that puck. Brad's right. Like he darts, he finds lanes, he kind of creates plays, and it's almost way more like smooth and flashy than what you would expect based on his first couple steps or how he plays off the puck. But then, the puck's not always on his stick, and that's the question of his game. I think I have a few or a bit more concern about his skating than Brad does. I think his foot speed is a bit concerning to me to the point where it's like, yeah, is this a guy who's going to end up not being able to do this at NHL pace? But at the same time, we've seen time and time again in the NHL is if you're talented enough and you have the brain for it, you don't need to be a burner. You look at Mark Stoner and Nikita Kucherov, which those aren't his comparables, but you don't need to be a burner to be effective in the NHL. So I think this is a top of the draft player and absolutely has a ceiling of a top of the lineup player. But is he the bolt-on, top 3 or 4 guy? For me, I think the centers in this draft maybe have him edged out there.
For sure. I know the player comp that goes around a lot for him is Matthew Tkachuk. I don't think he has quite the sandpaper as him, but, Matthew Tkachuk isn't a great skater, but he's great with the puck. He can score in all ways, and he can take the puck to the net. And I see a lot of that with Porter Martone. He's not going to burn guys, but he can score with his talent and get to those dirty areas. And I think that was one of the impressive things I saw about him.
I've heard the Matthew Tkachuk one. I don't see it at all with him. Like when he gets near the net front, sure, yeah, he's got that touch, the size, the strength to do the things Tkachuk does in that area. But away from it, they're very different players. And my comp for him, I don't think he's going to be this good. But if you're talking stylistically, I see a lot of Tage Thompson in him. In the shot, the creativity, I think Tage is a better skater than Martone, which is going to be the big separator between what Martone's ultimately going to be and what Tage is. But you get that huge skill guy with a wicked release, excellent hands, high creativity. Like that's the type of player I see him being. And then obviously when you're that size, you get near the net front, you can make things happen.
I think what it comes down to for me is Martone has as high of a ceiling as anyone else in this draft. And it's not a pick your poison, it's a pick your dessert, I guess, if you have the luxury of a top pick. If you're picking number 1 is when you have number 1, 2, 3, 4 is when you have the luxury of looking at the downsides. If you're on the outside of that, you're not seeing a Porter Martone type player at 8, 9. It just won't happen. He's too good of a prospect. So that's Porter Martone. Probably a player we're going to talk about more. I would love for that to be a problem for the Red Wings to think about that downside, but we'll see after the draft lottery, I guess. Okay. A word from the sponsors of the Wing Wheel podcast. Back after this.
We're going to overtime.
Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to support the show, you not only help the show do everything that it does, run Winged Wheel podcast nights, support the Jamie Daniels Foundation, you also get access to benefits like our overtime bonus episodes, which record right after these main ones. We let loose, have fun, we add in bloopers. I'm going to add a segment in today from like when we were off recording here, where we were just quizzing Brad's Rain Man-ism. It is unbelievable. So our patrons will be able to hear that. You'll also get access to our Winged Wheel Podcast Patreon exclusive Discord, which has just started its own version of Light the Lamp, which is awesome. And there's a little mini gold helmet for the current leader.
Who is?
Which is you right now.
That's
Evan.
right. Correct.
Yeah, I got to get in on that, which is, it's an amazing community, the Discord community, very clearly only getting better. You're also automatically entered into all of our giveaways. We give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, for example, going directly to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Time for some questions from our patrons. Breehound says, heard rumors that the players are pushing for a change to the CBA to allow for a more equal playing field for higher tax states. What do you see as the most realistic solution between the players in the league? This math is hard, but I do lean towards they need to find some solution.
I agree. You look at the top teams in the league and the imbalance is showing. You still need good ownership and a good organization, even if you're in a no-tax state, because obviously Florida was a laughingstock forever, and then they got it together, and now it's obviously a great organization that has a huge advantage. You can get complicated with the salary cap. Any NFL fan knows that. And someone will put in the work to be able to explain it to idiots like us. So I'm not super scared of that. I think, what was it? Again, I think 32 Thoughts was talking about today, like there's an 18% difference between one of the no tax states and like New York, 17 to Ontario. Like that's a lot of money and that's a huge imbalance. So the easy solution to me is you set the cap and then you add that percent to each location, because that's what's actually being funneled into the NHL bubble of money, if you want to call it. Because
it's also important to remember, though, you're taxed on where you play, so away games don't count.
Yeah, and you can figure out the exact math, et cetera, et cetera. But you put that amount on top of that team's salary cap. You could even cap it at like you're only getting a 10% bonus. Beyond that, you're on your own. And if you're in a 4% overage, well, that's all you get is 4%. Don't get greedy. So that seems like the easiest solution to me. And I'm sure there's caveats and catches and ways to game the system, but something along those lines I think needs to be done.
There could be some, there's probably accountants and CPAs listening to this, like being like that. As soon as I say something, they'll be like, that doesn't work at all because of 4,000 reasons of the tax law.
Yeah, it's like, oh, half your games are away, so you're not actually paying an extra 18%. Fine, 9%. I don't care, whatever.
You could create mechanisms that, offload the balance or balance everything out, right? Like the NHL could have some sort of centralized fund. So I'm so sorry, accountants, if this is just an idiot speaking, which is, you're right, to help balance it out at the end of the year or through multiple times throughout the year. Like, there's very smart people handling a ton of money in this league. There's going to be ways to solution this to balance it out if, in fact, it is a big issue for players and owners.
So you accidentally just proposed a second escrow, and what the players will do is they're going to pass a motion to shoot you.
Well, the players, be careful with what you say, Ryan. If you say that on the internet,
how do we go?
I'll make sure you are
podcast
banned.
Jail?
Maybe, yeah.
Thank you for making me lose my thought as well.
It's not hard to do, brother.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah, it's again, like you get into the nitty gritty of how's the perfect way to do it, and a place with 0 state income tax, well, their property taxes are higher. Well, if you take with the bonus payment as opposed to your weekly salary or whatever it is, that's different. It all gets into it, but I think what it boils down to is whether or not you believe there is an advantage and whether that's having a significant or measurable effect on the balance of the league. It wasn't the case before. It is now that these Florida teams, for example, have figured out how to, leverage that advantage. I think the players are always going to vote for more money for some teams. Of course, more money in the system is better for them. It's going to be a big bargaining chip from the NHL franchises, though, because they're not going to want to give up more money to the players.
For sure. And, I always used to be the guy who was with everyone else being like, this is a huge advantage. They need to figure this out. But, we talked to guys like Dan Milstein, and a lot of GMs have been on record saying that players don't ask them about that at all. Or like, it's not part of the negotiation tactic. So my stance on that has softened a bit. If the players are pushing for this, clearly for the body of the NHL players, this is an issue. So they can figure it out. It'll fall where it falls for me.
Evans RBF says, who from Grand Rapids is taking the jump to the NHL, and why is it Kosa and Danielson? Also sad to see the Wings be the worst team in Detroit right now. The Pistons will make the playoffs before the Red Wings. We really do live in a simulation. Danielson makes sense. Kosa, I think, just really depends on the camp he has. That's what it always comes down to with goalies. Like Kosa,
maybe Boeser will be ready.
Yep. I think Danielson, the only player you can look at and say by virtue of what this team needs, that is helping Danielson. All these guys are going to be limited by or determined by the camps that they have. Kosa could come and be lights out for Grand Rapids all year, but if he, knock on wood that he's not, but let's say he's atrocious in camp and in preseason, well, then they're not going to start him on the Red Wings. We'll see, though. But yeah, Danielson, great case. Kosa, great case. Boeser, great case. We'll see if any of like William or Will Linder surprise, but it would be a surprise. Dan Bell says, is it just me or did Berggren get weaker? He looks like a child out there sometimes, and I can't remember the last time I saw an NHL player fall as much as he does. Do you think he's a good trade piece in the summer? I don't see a long-term future for him on this team.
Listen, how quickly we forget about Tyler Bertuzzi.
That man lived for snow on his pants. I see the long-term effects of a fuller NHL season for Berggren on his game. I do also think that he needs to play himself back into having a certain spot, especially as we talk about guys making this team. Won't be long until we're talking about MBN as well and other players down the roster. So if Berggren wants a spot, he's going to have to earn it. Otherwise, he's very firmly in Veleno territory where it's like he could be in the lineup and helpful some games. He could be in the lineup and not helpful others. And one day he'll be trade fodder.
Are you elite defensively or are you putting up points? If you're doing neither, what's your role? And unfortunately, that's the entire Red Wings bottom six.
And last one here, the Dandy Man Can says, would you bring back Kane next year? I love watching other teams scared of him when he has the puck, but I hate watching him scared of physicality when the other team has the puck. Remember you guys talking about how he would have been unplayable in the Four Nations, and I agree, but doesn't that mean he'd be unplayable if we end up playing really good teams in the playoffs too? We need top six, but is Kane really a top six on a playoff team?
I think it depends what the alternatives are. Realistically, do I think they're going to find two top six forwards better than Kane? I'm very skeptical. Is Danielson going to step in and be better than Kane? At some things, yes. But overall impact, I'd be skeptical. So I'm open to it. I would see the logic in it, but there would have to be accompanying moves to shore up the rest of the top six. Like if they get a Marchand or a Tavares or a Marner and they're not leaning on that line as heavily, sure. But then again, if you're getting a Marner, are you putting Kane on the second power play unit? Right? So I don't know. I'm open to it, but other avenues need to at least be explored.
I fully agree. I think Kane, Father Time, undefeated. Kane is trending downwards in terms of overall play. There is a world where you have a better version of Patrick Kane if you don't have to worry about him at 5-on-5 as often as you do. You're only really putting him out there on the power play and to add a dangerous element to, your down the lineup, middle six, bottom six, whatever. Yeah, that's what you need. If you need Patrick Kane, need him on your top line in the playoffs, and it's not just because you found this magic, mix of players that's working in a hypothetical playoff team, then you're right. That's not what you want in your top six for a playoff team. There are very few playoff teams in the NHL that wouldn't benefit from Patrick Kane on their power play and to deploy in specific offensive moments. So if the Red Wings, this is the case, like you said, Brad, this is the case for so many players. They're not bad players in and of themselves, but if you can just slot them properly by pushing them down the order, then it becomes so much better. Imagine all of your viewings of Patrick Kane this year. Filter out 80% of the 5-on-5 that you saw and hated and keep all the power play. Of course you want Kane back. So I want Kane back. The money and the number is going to depend too, but it seems like a fit here, but it needs to come with accompanying moves. You're right, Brad. All right. That's all for this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. I'd like to thank all of our new listeners. Welcome to the show. Sorry, the vibes are end of season vibes right now. Listeners of old, this is getting old, isn't it? But we're still here with you. We appreciate you being here with us. To the sponsors of the Winged Wheel Podcast, thank you very much. Also, just a heads up, if you hear us read out an ad on the show, that is an active sponsor of the Winged Wheel Podcast. If it's like a commercial, that's just a dynamic regional ad that you're getting. You might not have the same one as the person next to you. We don't know which ones you're getting specifically. There are filters that we set. Like there should be nothing, we keep away from anything political, or if it makes the front page of the Times, for example, it's generally not an ad. Sometimes advertisers, they mislabel or whatever. So stuff sneaks through the filter. So if that's the case, just shoot us a message. But yeah, that's we've gotten some interesting ones recently.
Oh, good to know. I'm still not going to listen.
Yeah, you should not listen to the show. I will tell you, editing is the worst part of all this. And I sit next to both of you twice a week, and editing is by far the worst part of all of this.
You know how, like, if you're listening to a podcast in the car and the one podcast you're listening to, like, ends and then the next one autoplays? Sometimes we come up next for me and it's a jump scare.
Didn't Hank and Mika make you play the podcast for a long time?
They put it on YouTube all the time on our TV at home. I hate it so much. But they've probably made us like $37 in YouTube ad revenue over the years.
Those are troubled kids. To all of our Patreon supporters, we could not do this without you. Patreon.com/WingedWheel Podcast if you want to support the show. The overtime, the bonus content, the Discord, the Light the Lamp, the giveaways, all of that and lots more. And if you want to support, but Patreon's not for you, wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, subscribe, leave a rating, a thumbs up, the stars, the review, tell a friend about the show. All of that helps a ton. To our name level supporters on Patreon, you are the greatest. Evan told us before he left today. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, THL Champ, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Glenn Brabham, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Adam Rose, Adam Zawiza, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Alex Toger, Anna Sleeman, Asher Killian, Beer League Legend, Best James Bond, Carl Bertina Nanaluski, CB55, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gimmer Girl, Derek Enstam, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, Give Blood, Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Grand Rapids Girly, Griffin God Creatives, Hatrick Sandin Pellikka, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, James McLean, a.k.a. Jambo, Jeff Pridemore, Jennifer Morris, John Engels, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Lunchbox, Mark Hernandez, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, Mr. Kuzi. Now I have to learn how to click on a Macintosh. Oompa Loompa Pekkanen. Podgy713, R.A., Richard Perkins, Roy Dunk, Ryan Britt, Sam Bankson, Skeletor, Slim Smitty Cards, Stephen Ortlieb. That's what I appreciate about you. The Crusty Nuisance, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Wags Fan of Chicago, Iser Plan Stan, Aaron Hudson, General Indy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, A.A. Ron, Albert Johansson, All Motor No Hands, and Stanislavski. Another future consideration. Baked Starfish, Bellingham Acid Balls, Bex, C.E. Hayes, Chris Felinski, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Layton and Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Drop the Puck, Dylan Larkin Trade Sacrifice, Eric Nance, Evan Beckner, Evans Ham Radio, Gene Sullivan, Grepsky, Griffey Boy, James Pridemore, Johnny Page, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, JM Rhapsody, Josh Yelton, Chaotic Monkey, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Larkin's Loyal Lemming, Linda Hull, Lonnie Zone, Lucas Raymond, Mitch Minier, Morning Wood, Nerno Needs a Hug, Noted Soderblom Worshipper, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, Ophelia, As Good as It Gets, Roy Mudbutt, Ryan M, Sandy P, Right Hand D, Say You Can't Sleep, Baby I Know, That's Me, Poop, Steven, That Other Guy, The Hodag, The Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings Fan of St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll talk to you midweek.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to visit wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you'll find links to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find ways to support the show, like Patreon, official podcast merchandise, and more. And don't forget to follow us on X at Winged Wheel Pod, at Ryan Hanna, WWP, at Brad Crisco, and at Hockeytown Evan, as well as Winged Wheel Podcast on Instagram.